Hello everyone. In this video I want to go over the structure of chromosomes. So if we take a look at this image that I have on the screen here, we have your traditional kind of X-shaped structure that people tend to think of when we talk about chromosomes here. And we'll go over why this looks like an X in a little bit. But it breaks this down and shows you really what chromosomes are made of. And that's what I want to talk about today. And so when we look at chromosomes, they're really just, in eukaryotic organisms, a chromosome is one long continuous strand of DNA. And each chromosome in the nucleus of the cell is at that continuous strand of DNA. And so these are pretty long. It's got a long string of DNA, and when we look at a picture later on of some chromosomes, we'll see that the size of that chromosome can vary depending on what genes are written there. And so if you've learned about the structure of DNA, you know that it is this double helix structure here. It's a two-sided molecule that has nitrogen bases, and the order of these nitrogen bases determines what protein is going to be produced by this particular gene. I don't want to go into all the detail about introns and exons here, but what I want you to recognize is that this DNA molecule here contains thousands of genes written on it. And that strand of DNA then can coil up and wrap around specific proteins and create this chromosome structure. And so at particular spots, or particular locations or loci on this chromosome, you'll find certain genes. And we'll look at that in a little bit here. Your genes are what make you, and the way that they do that is that each gene is a segment or a section of that DNA that codes for one particular protein. And so going back, just a real brief overview of how that works. I do have a video that talks about DNA and its function, so if you want to learn more about that, you can go watch that. But each of those proteins carries out a specific job. Could be producing the melanin that gives your hair its color, or the protein could be a specific transport protein in the cell membrane of a neuron. And so it helps that neuron cell specialize and do the job that it needs to do. And so those genes and those proteins that are made ultimately specialize those cells and those tissues, and that's what makes you. And so that's why people say your genes are what make you. It's really they make the proteins. But those, really coming back to this chromosome structure, are just a segment of this big long strand of DNA that makes this entire chromosome. Now, the chromosome itself, to define this word chromosome here, it's just a single continuous strand of DNA that's tightly wrapped or tightly coiled around proteins. Your DNA is not always in this chromosome structure. In fact, during the majority of the cell cycle, it's in what we call chromatin structure. It's loosely packed around specific proteins. But before the cell goes through cell division, the DNA packs itself tightly, and it wraps around these specific proteins called histone proteins, Histone proteins. And then it coils up again on itself that way, and that's what creates this tightly packed chromosome structure here. And so that's really all a chromosome is. So let's look at a little bit more detail and actually name some parts of these. So here we see a single chromosome. And in human cells, we actually have 46 of these. A total of 46 chromosomes in the nucleus of most of our cells. During the cell cycle, right before the cell divides, all of that DNA is copied during that process of DNA replication. When that happens, those two daughter strands of DNA that are formed actually stick together here and create this X-type structure, this chromosome that you may or may not be familiar with. So I want to name some of these parts, because as we go further into cell division, you'll need to understand these. So this right here is our chromosome. When this is duplicated, when it gets copied, and we have the two sides here, they are genetically identical. And so we refer to these as sister chromatids. And so this would be one sister chromatid, this one over here would be the other. And there's this region in the middle of these chromosomes here that's referred to as the centromere. There are some proteins that will attach to that centromere, and when we get into mitosis and the division of the nucleus, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But these proteins here hold the two sister chromatids together and ultimately will help these divide during mitosis. So what I want you to know is that we have the centromere area, the centromere region in the middle, and you can see that on this electron microscope view of a chromosome, where these two sister chromatids, these sides here, are actually held together. And what we can see here is just how packed this DNA is around these proteins. With this electron micrograph here, this picture, you can't really see the DNA, but we can see that it's single strands of DNA, but we can see that it's really tightly packed around this. And so that's what these are, these sister chromatids. Once that DNA is copied during the synthesis stage, we end up with those sister chromatids. This image here, what I want to show you is called a karyotype. And somebody has taken the time to painstakingly put all of these two chromosomes together. This karyotype is an image of all of the chromosomes that would be in the nucleus of a single human cell. And so we usually number these. We have chromosome type 1, chromosome type 2, 3, 4, so on, all the way down to the 23rd type of chromosome, which we call our sex chromosomes, your X and Y. And so this karyotype here is showing really the chromosomes in the cell of a human male. So when we think about this, these aren't duplicated. They're not in an X shape. So if I go back to this previous picture, how these are held together here at the centromere, yes, these are next to each other, and this one might look like an X a little bit, but they're not bonded to, or they're not held together with these proteins. And so these are what we call pairs of chromosomes. So in a human cell, we have a total of 46 single chromosomes for really 23 pairs. And where do these come from? You get half of your chromosomes from your mom and half of them from your dad. And so each one of these chromosomes, these are what we call homologous. They contain the same types of genes. And so the chromosomes in this may contain the enzymes that help you in digestion. And so those enzymes that your dad has are very similar, are almost identical to the ones that your mom has. Now let's look at it a little more simply. Maybe this chromosome number 2 contains all the genes for your hair color and eye color. It's multiple genes that control that. Well, if you look at the genes in your dad and the genes in your mom, they don't have the exact same hair color and eye color, and so you can see some differences in these. However, they both do have hair color and eye color, so you're going to get those chromosomes from both of them. Let's name these a little bit and just go into a little more detail about that. See these bands here? These chromosomes have been stained to show specific regions in that DNA, and those could be identified as particular genes. These chromosomes, numbers 1 through 22, are what we typically refer to as autosomes. The autosomes have the genes that control just about everything that your body needs done. And so all of the proteins that make your hair straight or curly, or control your digestion, or allow things in and out of cells, those are going to be coded for on the majority of these autosomes, chromosomes numbers 1 through 22. The sex chromosomes, the X and Y chromosomes, are the chromosomes that are identified as determining your sex, whether you're male or female. And so if you have 2 X chromosomes, you would be considered female. If you have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, you are male. So that 23rd pair there is what we call the sex chromosomes. And we just talked about this a little bit, but why are there pairs? You get half your chromosomes from dad and the other half from your mom. And so that's where all 46 of those come from. You have 2 of each kind, and that's why we say there's 23 pairs. This right here is what we would call a diploid diploid cell, and so we'll talk about this as we get into cell division and go into mitosis and meiosis, but diploid or diploid means that you have the 2 sets of chromosomes, or 2N. N equals the number of types of chromosomes, so 1 through 23, and then 2 means that you have 2 versions of each. And so this karyotype here is showing a diploid human cell. And let's just go over this one last time here. How many chromosomes are in the human body cell? During gap 1 of the cell cycle, you have a total of 46. And then during the synthesis stage of the cell cycle, that's when this DNA replication happens. And so the DNA opens up, the polymerase comes and adds on new nucleotides. If you haven't seen or you haven't learned about DNA replication, I have a video that goes over that. You can go back and watch that and learn a little bit about how replication happens. But when that DNA gets copied, that's where these sister chromatids are made. So really, when you think about it, now these would be considered really one chromosome, but we have 2 versions of it. This is what we call a duplicated chromosome. So at the end of the S stage, there's 92 versions of those, of 92 chromosomes really inside the nucleus of your cell. So hopefully that clears up a little bit about the structure of chromosomes, identifies some of those parts. As we, like I said, as we get into cell division, mitosis, and then meiosis, you guys will need to be familiar with the centromere and the sister chromatids and kind of the location of genes on these chromosomes.